Yes, Mr Donnelly.
Thank you, Commissioner. I now call Stephen Weller.
Mr Weller, do you go into the witness box? Mr Weller, can I ask whether you'd prefer to be sworn or make an affirmation?
I can be sworn, yep.
Swear the witness, please.
Just repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr Weller. Do sit down. Yes, Mr Donnelly.
Thank you. Mr Weller, can you please state your full name?
Stephen Francis Weller.
And you've given your address to the Royal Commission.
Yes.
Have you received a summons to attend today to give evidence?
Yes, I have.
And do you have that summons?
I do have that here. You're going to take it from me?
I tender that summons, Commissioner.
Exhibit 3.96 will be the summons to Mr Weller.
Mr Weller, have you prepared a statement together with 29 exhibits of the evidence that you've given that you wish to give to the Commission?
Yes, I have.
And is that statement dated the 21st of May 2018?
Correct, yep.
And is it true and correct?
I believe so.
Commissioner, if I could tender Mr Weller's statement, please.
The statement of Mr Weller and its exhibits. The statement dated 21st May 18 is exhibit 3.97.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr Weller, can you assist the Commission today by briefly explaining your employment background?
How long have we got?
Well, perhaps you can start. Perhaps you can start by telling us what you did after you received your Bachelor of Commerce from Newcastle University.
Okay. I went into a professional accountant's office during the course of that degree, and then went out into commerce, worked for Lang Hancock for a period of time, and probably about 35 years of working in commerce up until the time that I bought the hotel.
And had you worked in the hospitality industry before you bought the Nambucca Hotel, which we'll come to in a moment?
I had spent some years in what I'd call family-owned hotels as a younger person.
And are you also, or were you a certified practicing accountant?
Yes, I was.
And you mentioned that you purchased the Nambucca Hotel. When did you do that?
October 2005.
And am I right to say that it was at that time that you resigned from your commercial position and took up running the pub with a business partner?
Yes, you could say that, yep.
And can you tell the Commission how you came to fund the purchase of the Nambucca Hotel back in 2005?
As I understood it at the time, there had been an auction program and a loan had been established for a possible purchase. Pardon me. So that was BankWest, and that loan was still available, and I was able to avail that loan at the time from BankWest.
And you purchased the whole hotel through Bainbridge Enterprises No. 1 Proprietary Limited. Is
Correct.
that right?
Correct. Yes.
And it was that entity that was the borrower for the facility at that time.
Correct.
Now, when you and we'll come to the facility, the subject of the major subject of evidence in a moment, but can you tell the Commission, please, a little bit about how you managed the hotel in that early period, that is between 2005 and about 2008?
Can you just ask that question again, please?
Can you tell the Commission how you managed the hotel, how it operated during the period from 2005 to 2008?
Well, I would visit the hotel from Sydney, probably on a basis which I think I've said in here, about 5 days a fortnight. Travel up, spend time there, and basically perform the role of a proprietor. And that continued until approximately 2008. That was all aspects of the hotel came under that management.
And in 2008, you bought out your partner, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And it was at that time that you say in your statement that Bainbridge, the company, took out a facility or a different facility for the purposes of buying out your partner, and you entered into a facility in about June 2008. Is that right?
That would be right. And yes, to your question.
And you set it out in your statement, and I'll just go through some of the terms of that. But as I understand it, the facilities obtained totalled about $3.725 million. Is that right?
Yes, that would be about right.
And there was an interest rate for a fixed portion, which had a fixed rate plus a margin of 2.24%.
Yes, on one half of it, yes.
And there was an interest rate for the variable portion, which was the bank bill swap rate plus 2.74%.
Correct. Yep.
And there was a mortgage over the hotel itself. Is that right?
Yes.
And you and your wife also offered guarantees. Is that right?
Correct.
And what was the length of the facility that you entered into at that time?
15 years.
And is it the case that there were also some non-monetary covenants on the facility?
Yes, that's true.
And what were they?
I think they refer to them as DSR and the ICR, which was interest cover ratio and a debt service ratio.
I see. Was there an LVR or a loan valuation ratio at that time?
Not at that time. I think it might have been referred to differently or in a different way, particularly in the 2005 documents, but they're not here. So there was nothing mentioned in that 2008.
I see. And you were also aware that the facilities, I might call it the 2008 facilities, were also governed by BankWest general terms for business lending?
Yes.
And you refer in your statement to those terms. Perhaps I can take you to CBA.0517.0094.0080.
All right.
Are these the terms to which you refer?
They look familiar.
And I think if you go to .0083, and we'll just blow up 1.2a. That refers to a facility review. Is that the provision that you referred to in your statement?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And perhaps I can skip ahead, and that can come down. In your evidence, you say that after you entered into the facility, the 2008 facilities, then you were informed by Mr. Goldsmith in about mid-2009 about a valuer being engaged. Who was Mr. Goldsmith?
He was the relationship manager for the bank.
I see. And what was it that he discussed with you in the middle of 2009?
Well, the fact that there was a need for evaluation at that time.
when had there last been a valuation of the Nambucca Hotel?
I think it was in 2006.
I see. And did you, or can you explain what involvement you had in the engagement of Mr. Quinlan, who was the person who did the valuation?
Well, as is the case with these things, the borrower pays for the valuer. So I selected Mr. Quinlan from the panel of valuers.
I see. And he produced a valuation of the Nambucca Hotel?
Yes, he did.
And that's in your evidence. If I can take you to SWF 04, which is CBA.4000.0059.8146. And that's a picture of the Nambucca Hotel on the front of the valuation I see there.
Correct.
And were you given a copy of this valuation?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
And in fact, if you go to, if I can ask the operator kindly to go to point 819, 8149, I'm sorry, page 4 of that document, and the hotel was valued at that point by Mr. Quinlan at $4.53 million.
Yes, correct.
Now, returning to around to that time, or perhaps you can explain for the Commission the nature of the business in the period during 2010 and how the hotel was travelling at that time.
2010, after the GFC, well, things changed a little bit. People, the effect on the economy was such that discretionary spending was impaired by people. So we had a little bit of a downturn in revenue, and this is something that I would communicate to the bank in my regular reporting to them. I started to spend more time at the hotel in an attempt to, keep the profitability up, decrease costs, manage the employment, manage the stock, all those sorts of things that you would try and do to assist in maintaining stability of the hotel and obviously the loan arrangements, yeah.
And in 2000, how often or what hours were you spending working at the pub around this time, Mr. Weller?
Start at 3:30 a.m. in the morning and finish about 9:30 at night.
And now Macksville, which is where the Nambucca Hotel was and is some way out of Sydney, is that right?
Yes.
How far is it from Sydney?
Oh, well, 5 to 6 hour drive.
And so how many days a week would you spend at the hotel?
At that time, I'd be spending 4 days a week, yeah.
And you've given evidence that around this time you received some notices of non-monetary breaches from BankWest, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
What was a non-monetary breach, or what was identified in those notices?
When they examined your reports and your financial statements and compared them to their requirements under the interest cover ratio and the debt servicing ratio, if you weren't hitting the limits that they had imposed, you were issued with a breach notice.
Were you up to date with any interest payments that had to be made on the loan at that time?
We were always up to date with our payments.
Now, in that year, in June 2010, the interest-only period and the fixed-rate period expired, and you had a discussion about that with a representative, Mr. Goldsmith, and what did he say in relation to the ongoing payment from around 2010 onwards?
2010. Basically, they were coming back and saying, they issued a variation, right, which is the normal thing. They called it a variation, but it was just a review of the facility. And they had, I think in the first set of documents that they presented, they'd put the term at 24 months.
You may be referring, it may assist, I think this is SWF 05, which is CBA.4000.0074.8001. Is that the document to which you're referring?
Yeah, that's the one. Yep.
And perhaps we can go to the next page. You referred to 24 months. Where it says the facility expiry date, it says 24 months from initial drawdown date.
Yes.
What did you understand that to mean?
Well, I'll just take it in two parts. The initial drawdown date to me always meant when the loan was rolled over, right?
Yes.
Not going back to the initial loan in past years. So 24 months from the initial drawdown date indicated to me that it was another 2 years from whenever this variation took place and the loan was rolled over.
I see. And you gave evidence previously that the from 2008 had a 15-year limit. Is that right?
Yes.
And what was, when you received this letter from the bank, had you discussed it with Mr. Goldsmith before you received this letter?
No.
And what was your reaction when you received this letter?
Well, I sent him a memorandum saying that, you know, the expiry date in particular was not what I would expect, because the original documents were all out to 2023. That was probably the main point that I was making. I had some discussion in that memorandum about the interest rate, and then the principal repayments that they were proposing were higher than I thought we could manage, given the circumstances at the time. And then the other things were the payment of the facility, where in the past we'd had a gap between the two parts of the loan, so that the cash flow could handle within the month the payment on time.
Are you referring, as you give your evidence, to your memo itself that's there, which is, I mean,
Yes,
if it would
I am.
assist with
Yes.
that, I'll call that up. It's SWF 06 CBA.0001.0318.1880. And if I could just go to where it says term of facility, is that, there's a paragraph there, the original documents all noted the expiry date of 8 June 2023. The current documents note only the term of 2 years from drawdown. In discussion, we have talked about the remaining 11 years after the 2 years contained in the documentation. I would presume then that there would be no objection to showing the date of 8 June 2023 in the current documentation. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
And then you referred to the margin. I won't go to that, but also the other issues that you've mentioned are in this memo. So is this how you responded to Mr. Goldsmith?
Yes.
In response to that? And you then had some further email correspondence with Mr. Goldsmith. Perhaps I can take you to SWF 07 CBA.4000.0075.1182. Perhaps we can go to the bottom of that. Or to the dot 1184. It's possible to put them both up, 1183 and 1184. Mr. Goldsmith wrote back to you. He apologised for not coming back to you sooner. You see there his email on the 10th of September.
Yes, I do.
And in relation to the term of the facility, you said, as discussed, the loan would be amortised over the remaining 13-year loan term, however, with a term of 4 years. This reduced term assists with pricing so as to alleviate issues with long-term funding premiums. That said, in my response to BC, I will seek that a fresh letter of variation be prepared with the remaining term based on the original funding date be used. What did you understand What did you understand Mr. Goldsmith was telling you at that time?
Well, I think he was saying that they were going to go back and reinstate the original date that I considered to be in effect, and they would look at the 13-year term remaining and look at pricing based on how they would set that up. But there was going to be what does he talk about? A fresh letter of variation be prepared with a remaining term based on the original funding date. And that,
yes, and that letter will come to in a moment.
Yes.
Why was that issue important to you, Mr. Weller?
well, in a business sense, you want to know that you've got a reasonable term in front of you for the loans, because it's just the way you would think in business, and that's the way it was set up initially, and there was no reason for it to be changed, in my view.
And he responds to the other issues. I just draw your attention to the margin. He says the margin of 3.19% will remain as it should look. We look to maintain this loan as a commercial bill. However, we'd be prepared to review the margin upon production of financial statements. So you were having a discussion about the length of making sure the length was what you understood it to be, but there was also a discussion about the interest rate that you were negotiating. Is that right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And then you responded there. Perhaps we can go to the to 1182. And under term of facility, you say the original date of 8 June 2023 is a term I've always related to in my own thinking.
Yes.
That's consistent with the evidence you've just given.
Yep.
Now following, then there's again, and I won't take you to all of it, but then there's a further discussion about the margin. You've suggested 3%, and then a discussion as to the principal repayments. So that then did result in another letter being sent, which is in fact the next exhibit's SWF 08, and this is CBA 400074.8041. And if you go to the second page, that does have a facility expiry date of 8 June 2023.
Yeah, it does.
Was that not what you had sought in those discussions with Mr. Goldsmith?
It's exactly what yeah. Yes.
And what was your reaction when you received then this letter of variation?
I was very happy.
And in relation to the margin, it provided a margin of 3.95%. Did you have some further discussions about that particular issue with Mr. Goldsmith?
Yes, I did. Yep.
And as a result of those discussions, or perhaps I should put it this way: what were your discussions with Mr. Goldsmith about that in that intervening period?
Well, I was comparing that rate to what had been in place previously, and there were two margins applied for the interest only and the other one, the fixed rate, or the variable and the fixed rate one, I should say, and they were respectively 2.24 and 2.74. So 3.95 was quite a large jump up from those.
And as a result of that, what further discussions did you have with Mr. Goldsmith?
Well, I think that if I can say it, The principal repayments were another point that I was trying to put across, whereby they were looking for a certain amount and I was trying to negotiate a smaller amount because of the cash flow that I knew, and also the non-monetary covenants, which I wanted to have a range rather than a fixed
I see.
number.
And another offer was made then, or another letter was received, another variation letter was received on the 12th of November 2010, which is CBA.4000.0074.8062. And if you go to the second page of that, I think this is ultimately the variation that was signed by you and your wife, is that right?
Yes.
And ultimately it was for 12 months from the initial drawdown date.
Yep.
Which is obviously less than what was in the previous document and what you discussed. Why was it that length of time?
I've no idea.
Well, did you feel able to, in your discussions with the bank, were you able to maintain the longer expiry date that you sought?
No, I wasn't. I think that information came to me by way of a telephone conversation that Gary Goldsmith and I had, and he was telling me what was going to happen. That was the expiry date was on the October variation letter was not going to remain. That the other matters that we've now got in this document were going to be put in place, and that is the 12 months, a principal repayment of $8,000, which was what I had negotiated, and the non-monetary covenants were altered also. One I think was reduced, and the other one stayed the same. Yes, so that revelation came by way of a telephone conversation, and then I received this further letter of variation.
And ultimately this was the variation that you signed?
Correct.
And noting the matters that, or perhaps summarising the matters you've identified, the expiry date was now 12 months?
Yes.
And the interest rate had gone up, I think, from the previous amount, or the previous margin had been 2.24%, it was now 2.81%.
Yes.
Yet it was not 3.95%, which I think was one of the...
That's right, yes.
And you also agreed in relation to payments towards the principal at $8,000 per month, is that right?
Correct, yep.
Then through, well, that no doubt the business goes on whilst you're having this negotiation, but then during 2011, can you explain how the business was going during the course of the length of this facility?
Well, it was in that same period where trading had turned down, and as I've said before, I attended the hotel on a more frequent basis so that I could try to not only work at the business but manage, the aspects of employment and stock and whatever I could do to help maintain the business, and obviously all the relationships with the bank and whatever.
And did you make the relevant principal and interest repayments that were required of you at that time?
Yes, we did. Yep.
And it is the case, is it not, that then at the end of 2011, the facility was extended for a further 12 months, is that right?
Yes.
And again, during 2012, you continued to make the payments that were due.
Yes.
Did you receive any notices from the bank during that period?
I think, as stated in here, we received some breach notices of the non-monetary covenants, right? And they were they incurred a fee of $250, which, I think, in all instances the bank waived, probably because I was such a good customer.
Well, can you explain? Or that occurred, I think, in your evidence. You refer to 2 occasions where that happened in 2012. You had a meeting in September 2012 with the bank. Can you explain to the Commission what happened at that meeting?
We had a meeting with Tim Dellett and Gary Goldsmith,
Who was Mr. Dellett?
a gentleman in credit.
I see. And how did this meeting come to occur?
Well, I think we received a phone call from Gary Goldsmith to say, yes, they want to have a meeting with us in Sydney on a certain date. And do you want me to go on about the meeting?
Yes, please.
Yep, okay. Well, at the meeting, Tim Dellett expressed the view that he thought that the value of the business and the property had deteriorated. He didn't offer any reason why he was saying that, but anyway, you take that as given. We discussed the purpose of the meeting was to explore how we would go about things so that we could head towards a renewal of the loans in January 2013. There was, in his view, probably a need to have certainly a need to have a valuation, and secondly, he expressed the view that we would probably need to inject some funds to reduce the loan balance because of the LVR, and he then we then discussed what other assets we may be able to introduce to sell. One of them was a set of the poker machine entitlements, which I offered as a means of reducing the loan, to sell a block of poker machine entitlements. We then explored the possibility of selling our house, which came up in conversation. And I think they were the main points of the discussion at that time.
The house wasn't security.
It was not security as part of these loans, no.
And when you left that meeting, what steps did you put in place in relation to these matters after that meeting?
Well, firstly, I engaged an agent to get a sale going for the block of poker machines, because that was, pretty straightforward. My wife and I talked about the house and thought that we would need to, or perhaps we should pursue a sale of the house, and I guess that's about all.
You mentioned one of the other issues that was raised by Mr. Dellett at that meeting was a valuation of the hotel.
Yep.
What happened in relation to that?
Well, the valuation was to be initiated by the bank on an expeditious basis because of the time, and basically I was saying time is of the essence because of the facilities becoming due in January 2013. Yeah. And
was that valuation obtained by the bank?
Eventually, yes.
And did you receive a copy of that valuation?
No, I did not.
You had another meeting with Mr. Dallett in December, do you know if he had received the valuation by that time?
I think he'd had a draft of it.
And what was discussed at that meeting that you had with Mr. Dallett at that time?
Well, we wanted to know the outcome of the valuation. He said that it was done on a privileged basis and therefore he could not provide us with the valuation, but he indicated that it was approximately 100% of the loans value.
And what did that mean, that it was a 100% of the loan from what Mr. Dallett told you?
Well, I presume that he meant like if the loan balances were around about the 3.6 mark, I think. I presume that that's what he was saying, that the valuation had come in at about 100% of the loans as an amount.
And did you discuss further with him the two other matters that you had raised and you've given some evidence about, and that is the sale of the gaming entitlements or the poker machines and your home?
Yes, I think I'm sure that we discussed it, and whatever I've said in here, it would have been that the PMEs, I'd arranged for an agent to sell them. We had put the home on the market, and he then said that they were not intending to roll over the loans because of insufficient time. That was as a consequence of the fact that the bank had not initiated the valuation until November. They had not instructed the valuer until November, as I understood it, and now they had a draft, and we're in December, and the loans were to expire on the 10th of January, and there was insufficient time to roll over the loans. Well, make your own judgment.
Well, so just to put that in context, so you've had this meeting in your evidence, I think you say that it was on the 3rd of December. And when was the facility to expire?
10th of January.
And then after that meeting, what was the next contact you had with the bank, as best you can recall?
Golly. Well, I think that from there on, we had email exchanges, right? And the bank, I think, well, what Dallett was saying was that the only way we could go forward was by way of a deed of forbearance, right? Which was to be prepared, and yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say, but
your evidence says that you received a draft of that in January.
yeah.
And you got some advice from solicitors in relation to that. You wrote, you continued to correspond over email with Mr. Dallett about the deed of forbearance.
Yeah, well, as you say, we received it on the 8th of January, and the facilities were expiring on the 10th, and that worried me because obviously we wouldn't have time to examine the deed of forbearance before the facilities were due to expire, and I thought that left us exposed to the bank calling a breach on the loans themselves, you know, and we got a response from him to say, you know, like the deed of forbearance is not due to be signed until, I think, the 22nd of January.
I see.
And under the terms of the deed, we needed to get legal advice, which we then had to appoint a solicitor to help us with the deed of forbearance and negotiate whatever terms were going to be in that deed.
And until, sorry, then, if I can take you then to, well, the deed of forbearance was entered into in January. And I didn't ask you previously, but during the course of 2012, were you also, had you made your repayments during 2012?
All repayments and interest were up to date. Yep.
And
Well, I'll change that. We're always made on time.
and the deed of forbearance required you, amongst other things, to sell 3 of the pokie machines, is that right?
Yes.
And also to provide funds from the sale of your home, is that right?
Yes.
And can you explain what happened first in relation to the sale of the pokie machines?
Well, we did achieve a sale with a major organisation, and they had a threshold, I think, something like the 29th of January, in order for us to complete the sale. And we approached the bank to tell them that we needed to have their approval to release the poker machines from the security, and that the threshold was the 29th of January, and therefore it was, pretty urgent to get it done. So in the fullness of all of that, the bank came back and said, well, they're not prepared to release it unless and until the deed of forbearance is signed. So that sale collapsed.
But you were able ultimately to sell them, weren't you?
Subsequent to that, yes, in fact, the same buyer came back. That was Coles. Right? They had, in fact, another hotel they could use the poker machines in, and they had deposited the sale proceeds with my solicitors into my solicitor's trust fund. All the paperwork had been done. We'd lodged the papers, the transfer papers, with Olga. And
Who's Olga?
Office of Liquor, Gaming and Racing.
Which was required to transfer the poker machines?
Yeah, the authority, they have to authorise it, or they have to sign off on it, yes. And so we were aware that there was a backlog in Olga of approximately 2 weeks, we thought and understood. So at that stage, I think going back in my mind, 28th of Feb was the date called for in the deed of forbearance. A little time before that, we realised that it was not going to happen, and we wrote to the bank under the terms of the deed, as we could, to request an extension to the date. And I think I suggested, rather than extending at 2 weeks at a time and monitoring Olga in the meanwhile. I think Tim Dellett wrote back and wanted to know how long it would be or when it would happen. I said, well, I don't really know because it's in the hands of the authority. But if you extend on a couple of weeks at a time, we would be able to monitor that. And subsequently, when was that? 28th Feb. On the 5th of March, we received an email from Tim Dellett saying there was a breach of the terms of the deed of forbearance. I corresponded with him immediately, asked him to withdraw it. Our solicitor wrote to the bank's solicitor asking them to withdraw it and that we'd requested an extension. We didn't really get an answer from the bank on the extension, the request for the extension at the time. But 5th of March, we were issued with the breach. 8th of March, they received the money from the poker machines, which would have been 8 days after our request, after the day that it was meant to be paid.
And it was around this time, was it, that you lodged your complaint with FOSS, with the financial
Shortly
Ombudsman
after
Service?
that, yeah.
And why did you bring that complaint?
Well, at that stage, I reckoned I knew what the bank was on about, and although I had no knowledge of FOSS at that particular time, and the bank had said that they will refrain from taking any action for 14 days, so I was pretty concerned at that stage that things were going to be taken out of my hands. And
What do you mean by you're pretty concerned that things might be taken out of your hands?
Oh, I thought they would foreclose, and if that's a word you can use, that they would. They've called the breaches. They were reserving their rights all the way along. We were getting all that sort of those sort of terms were being used, and therefore I had every thought to believe that they were going to appoint receivers.
And what happened as a result of your complaint to FOSS?
Well, we lodged a long letter of complaint that went on. That's from March until about November. We had a phone conference between FOSS, the bank, and ourselves in November.
And am I right to say that you ended up resolving the dispute with BankWest through the FOS process at that time?
Well, we agreed on a process only because we were told that if we didn't agree, the bank would be able to determine the course of action. So we had no option but to agree.
And then that required the sale of the hotel.
Yes.
And sorry, I should have said you continued to run the hotel, did you, during the course?
Yes, I did.
Of 2013.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Yep.
And were you able to sell your house during that time?
The house was under contract, I think, at that stage, and settlement had not occurred at that time.
Sorry, can you just assist just in terms of the chronology? The sale of the house did settlement occur after you'd commenced the FOS proceeding or complaint?
Yes.
And why was it that you didn't? Why was it that you didn't pay any of the proceeds of the sale of the house to BankWest?
I thought that was my most prudent course, and I didn't feel any obligation because the bank had, well, what's the word I would like to use, unilaterally cancelled the forbearance of the deed.
And sorry, just then to return to where we were in our chronology, that the settlement occurred in December 2013. That required you to sell the hotel by the 28th of February of the following year. Were you able to do that?
No.
And
Well, I'll just say this, that the agent that we appointed advised us not to commence marketing in December because it was, just a waste of time. So we started off in January. So it was a big ask, and to achieve a contract by the end of February.
and ultimately you weren't able to
No.
do so. And thereafter you, or Mr. Dallek contacted you again at that time, did he?
Oh, yes, I think he issued a breach notice, yeah.
And you made a further complaint to FOS at that time?
Yes, on different, what we thought would be different grounds. Yep.
That's right. Well, you set out in paragraph 88 of your statement the grounds, and that, well, perhaps I can take you to that. That's CBA.4000.0074.3006. So it's CBA.4000.0074.3006.
It's FW 26.
Thank you, Commissioner. And if I can just go to the dispute summary about 4 lines down where you set out the reasons starting with 1. And when you say there were different reasons, is that a reference to what you say are the reasons in this application, that the facilities were changed against the will of the borrowers from a 15-year loan to facilities with only a 12-month term?
Yes. Yes, did I hear? Yep.
And was that and you go on then to explain further that they were amended only 2 years into the facilities. Was that a reference to what occurred, the discussion we had about what happened in 2010?
Yes.
And FOSS ultimately determined it didn't have jurisdiction in relation to this complaint, didn't it?
Yeah, correct. Yep.
And when you were informed of that on the 22nd of May 2014, what happened after that?
Well, as I understand it, recollect, I should say, we had some further communications with Mr. Dellett. We were going through the sale process and trying to obtain a sale.
You weren't able to, though. You weren't able to in the end, were you?
No, but we put to them that we needed some further time to explore another way of selling or dealing with the business. Anyway, that didn't hold any water. We then, after the FOSS had knocked us back, that must have been in June, I think, or on the 7th of July, the receivers were appointed, yeah, or moved in, yeah.
And that's when you finished managing the hotel. And thereafter you received a letter of demand in relation to the guarantee, and ultimately the hotel was sold by the receivers, wasn't it?
Correct, yep.
And you were there was ultimately proceedings against you in the New South Wales Supreme Court.
Correct.
And you were able to resolve those ultimately with BankWest in about 2016. Is that right?
Yep.
Mr. Weller, did you make a public submission to this Royal Commission?
Oh, yes, I did.
And was it you were contacted then by someone at the Royal Commission to prepare this statement? Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Sherry.
I have no questions for Mr. Weller, the Commissioner.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Weller, then thank you for your evidence. You may step down. You're excused further attendance.
You want this back, do you? You sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weller.